It began on a calm Saturday morning, the kind of morning Ethan lived for, when the mist rolled gently across the lake and the world was still half asleep. The water shimmered like glass, reflecting the early sun that peeked through the tall pines. Birds glided over the surface, and the air smelled of pine and dew. Ethan stood on his small wooden dock with a cup of coffee in one hand and a towel in the other, wiping down his fishing rod. This lake had been in his family for generations, a hidden gem tucked behind the hills outside town, far away from noise and trouble. It was his safe place, his peace, the one part of life untouched by the chaos of the HOA community next door. He'd built his cabin by hand, placed every board, every nail, every stone around the edge of the dock. Life was quiet, simple, and just the way he liked it, until that morning when the laughter came. At first, it was faint, drifting across the water like a ghostly echo. Ethan looked up, confused. No one was supposed to be here, not on his land. He thought maybe it was hikers passing by or kids lost on the trail. But then the laughter grew louder. More voices, more chatter, even music playing from a speaker. He squinted toward the opposite shore and saw movement. Bright umbrellas, folding chairs, a cooler, and the glint of fishing rods being set up along the waterline. Ethan's heart sank. There were people on his land, standing right where the no trespassing signs were clearly posted. He set his coffee down, picked up his binoculars, and peered across the shimmering lake. What he saw made his jaw tighten. There they were, HOA members from the nearby Ridgeview community, the same ones who had been trying to stretch their rules beyond their neighborhood for months. And leading them, as always, was Karen, tall, loud, wearing her signature wide-brimmed hat and holding a clipboard like she was inspecting her own kingdom. She was laughing, pointing toward the water, and directing people where to sit. Ethan couldn't believe it. He had spent years keeping this place private, paying taxes, maintaining the dam, and making sure the ecosystem stayed balanced. Yet here they were, acting as if it was their public playground. He walked to the end of his dock and called out, his voice firm but polite, "Excuse me, this is private property." The laughter stopped for a moment. Heads turned. Then Karen, without hesitation, cupped her hands to her mouth and shouted back, "It's community property now." Her voice carried across the still water like a challenge. Ethan blinked, certain he had misheard her. "Community property," he muttered under his breath. There was no such thing. He raised his voice again. This lake is privately owned. You're trespassing." But Karen just smiled, a smug, confident smile that had driven many of her neighbors mad over the years. She turned to her group and said loudly enough for him to hear, "Don't mind him. He thinks he owns the view, too." The group chuckled, and someone popped open a can of beer. Ethan's blood pressure rose. He wasn't a man who liked conflict, but this was too much. He walked up the hill to his truck, grabbed his phone, and started recording. He zoomed in on Karen, her group, and the vehicles parked half on the grass near the old access road, his access road. He had warned the HOA last year not to cross the old fence line, but they had ignored it. The board members believed everything around their new homes belonged to them. The walking trails, the woods, and now, apparently, his lake. Ethan stood still, trying to stay calm. He didn't want to start a fight. He just wanted peace. But Karen didn't believe in peace. She believed in control. She strutted to the water's edge and planted a small HOA flag in the ground like she was claiming territory. "This is now open for community use," she declared to her group. Ethan could barely believe what he was seeing. One man cast a fishing line, another woman set up a portable grill, and kids began throwing rocks into the water. The quiet lake was now chaos. The sound of laughter, splashing, and chatter filled the air. Ethan clenched his fists, remembering his father's words, "Never let anyone take what's yours, even if they smile while doing it." His father had fought to keep this land when developers tried to buy it decades ago. Now it was happening again, only this time, the enemy wasn't a company. It was an HOA president with too much power and too little sense. Ethan crossed his property line and drove around to the far side of the lake where Karen and her group were gathered. His tires kicked up dust as he parked near the old oak tree that marked the boundary. The moment he stepped out, All eyes turned to him. Karen stood tall, pretending not to be bothered. "Oh, look who finally decided to join us," she said mockingly. Ethan took a deep breath. "This isn't a public lake. You're trespassing, and you need to leave." She laughed. "Oh, relax. We're not hurting anything. We're just enjoying nature. Isn't that what neighbors do?" Ethan pointed to the sign nailed to the tree. "Private property. No trespassing." "It's clearly marked," he said. "You know this isn't community land." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, come on. That old sign? Please." The HOA board voted last month to include this area as part of our recreation space. It's for everyone now. Ethan stared at her, speechless. "You can't just vote to take someone's land." She smiled sweetly. "Well, the board disagrees." The people behind her nodded in agreement, as if her word was law. One of the men even said, "She's right. It's all connected anyway." Ethan took a slow step forward. "It's not connected. This lake is fed by a private dam, owned by me. You're fishing in my water." Karen crossed her arms. "Prove it," she snapped. Ethan realized she wasn't bluffing. She actually believed she could claim it by acting confident enough. He exhaled deeply. "All right," he said quietly, "you'll regret this." Karen smirked. "I already regret wasting my morning arguing with you." The arrogance in her tone made his stomach turn. She turned to her guests again and said loudly, "Everyone, enjoy yourselves. Don't let this man ruin your fun." Laughter erupted again. Ethan stood there, watching the scene unravel, trying to hold back the anger boiling inside. He turned to leave but stopped when he saw one of the kids stepping into a small fishing boat tied to his dock. "Hey!" he shouted. "Get off that boat." The boy froze. Karen frowned, then barked, "It's fine. He's just playing." Ethan's patience snapped. "That's my property too," he yelled. Karen threw up her hands dramatically. "Oh, for heaven's sake. You can't own everything that touches this lake. It's community property." Her voice echoed across the water again, sharp and defiant. Ethan took a photo of the scene, recording the people, the signs, and the vehicles. "You'll hear from the county," he said firmly. Karen laughed. "You go right ahead. They already know who runs this neighborhood." Ethan didn't respond. He walked back to his truck, his mind spinning with frustration and disbelief. How could someone be so bold, so sure of themselves while being so completely wrong? The drive back to his cabin felt longer than usual. Every sound, the gravel crunching, the chirping of crickets, the wind through the trees, felt heavier now, like the calm before a storm. He parked, sat on his porch, and stared out at the lake. The laughter continued in the distance. It wasn't just noise anymore. It was a declaration, a challenge. Karen had crossed a line, and she knew it. Ethan rubbed his temples and took a deep breath. He didn't want trouble, but she'd given him no choice. He opened his old file cabinet inside the cabin and pulled out a folder marked Lake Deeds and Rights. Inside were documents yellowed with age, proof of ownership, maps from 1932, and letters from the county. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile a man wears when he knows something his enemy doesn't. The night fell quietly, but Ethan didn't sleep. He sat by the window, watching the moonlight dance across the water where shadows moved. People still fishing, lights still flickering. He whispered to himself, "All right, Karen. You want to play ownership games? Let's play." The next morning, the mist was gone, replaced by clear skies and the sound of car doors slamming. The HOA group was back again, even louder this time. Ethan walked out, calm, collected, his camera ready. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply filmed. Karen saw him and smirked. "Oh, recording again? You really like playing lawyer, don't you?" Ethan didn't answer. He just zoomed in on her as she tore down one of his signs and laughed. "These don't mean anything," she said. "The HOA overrides local nonsense." Her words were pure arrogance, but Ethan let her talk. The more she said, the better his evidence became. She had no idea how bad it would look later. He turned off his camera after a while and went back to his cabin, the video safely stored. He sat down at his desk, pulled out his laptop, and opened the county's online records portal. Within minutes, he found the digital deed proving his ownership. Signed, sealed, and public. He smiled again, a different kind of smile this time. He wasn't angry anymore. He was patient. He knew the truth was stronger than any HOA claim. But still, part of him felt uneasy. Karen was the type who didn't back down, even when proven wrong. She would push until she embarrassed herself. And maybe, Ethan thought, that was exactly what needed to happen. The war had started with a laugh across the lake, but it wouldn't end with one. It would end with silence. The silence that comes when truth finally hits like a stone dropped in still water next morning. The sun rose over the calm lake, its golden light touching the ripples that had been disturbed only hours before by laughter and argument. And Ethan stood on his porch staring at the water that used to be his quiet escape but now felt invaded, violated, and different, as if the peace had been stolen from it. He could still hear echoes of Karen's voice shouting across the surface, declaring it community property like she was announcing some royal decree, and that thought alone made him clench his jaw. He brewed his coffee slowly, eyes never leaving the lake, knowing she would be back. People like Karen never stopped at one visit. Control was an addiction for her. She had tasted power, and now she wanted more. But this time Ethan was ready. He had his documents, his camera, and his patience sharpened like a blade. Around mid-morning, the familiar sound of SUV tires crunching gravel reached his ears, and when he looked down the hill, he saw 3 cars pulling up near the same access road as yesterday, doors opening, voices laughing, fishing rods in hand, and at the center of them all was Karen again, in her usual crisp white outfit, sunglasses reflecting the sunlight like mirrors of arrogance, clipboard tucked under her arm as if she was leading an inspection. Not a trespass. Ethan sighed, put down his mug, and started walking toward the lake, his boots sinking into the damp grass, each step slower than the last, because he knew this wouldn't be a short conversation. By the time he reached the dock, Karen was already waving to people, pointing at the shoreline, commanding like a general before battle. She had that kind of energy, confident but poisonous, and when she spotted Ethan, her smirk widened like she had been waiting for this moment. "Good morning, neighbor," she called out, cheerful in a way that only meant trouble. "Beautiful day for a lake gathering, isn't it?" Ethan didn't smile. He just said, "It's private property, Karen, and you know that." She laughed, tilting her head slightly. "Oh, Ethan. You keep saying that like it means something. The HOA has decided to make this lake part of the community space. It's open to all members now." Ethan stared at her, his patience thinning. "You can't decide something like that, Karen. This land isn't part of your subdivision." She lifted her clipboard like it was a weapon, flipping through papers that looked official but meant nothing. "Actually, according to our new boundary survey," she said proudly, tapping the page, "this lake touches HOA-managed land, and that makes it shared property by definition." Ethan almost laughed, not out of humor but disbelief. "By definition?" he repeated. "Karen, that's not how property law works, and you know it." She crossed her arms, the smile fading but her arrogance growing. "You can challenge it if you want, but the HOA board already approved the change, and since no one objected during the public notice period, it's official." Ethan blinked. "Public notice? What public notice?" Karen grinned. "The one we posted on the bulletin board by the clubhouse, for 72 hours. You didn't see it? Not my problem." Ethan felt his blood boil. "Karen, you can't post something 3 miles away and call that legal notice for my land." She shrugged. "It's how the process works. Ethan, you should attend meetings if you care so much." Her tone dripped with mockery. The other members behind her giggled, clearly enjoying the show, filming the encounter like it was entertainment. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "Karen, I have ownership documents that go back almost a century. This lake isn't up for discussion." Karen smirked again. "Then show them to the board, we'll review them. But until then, it's community property." Ethan took a slow step forward, his shadow stretching over the grass. "You're trespassing," he said quietly. "And you're giving orders on land that doesn't belong to you." Karen turned away as if bored. gesturing to one of the men with a cooler. "Put the drinks near that tree," she said, "and someone get the grill started." Her disregard was complete, like his words didn't exist. Ethan wanted to yell, but something in him said no, stay calm, let her build her own trap. She was too proud to realize she was already in it. He walked away without another word, and that made her call out, "Where are you going, Ethan? Gonna call your lawyer." Her group laughed, but Ethan didn't turn back. He simply said, "You'll see soon enough." Back at his cabin, he sat at the table and spread out his papers, scanning each one, the old deeds, the maps, the signatures. The lake, the surrounding land, the dam. It was all his, undisputed. He called the county office to double-check the records, and the clerk confirmed it immediately. "Yes, sir. Your property extends 50 feet beyond the current waterline on all sides. It's clearly yours." That reassurance calmed him a little, but he still felt something deeper. Anger mixed with disbelief. The kind that builds slowly until it turns into resolve. He spent the afternoon printing duplicates, marking boundaries, and making notes, his quiet cabin now filled with the hum of the printer and the occasional rustle of paper. Outside, he could still hear distant laughter, faint but constant, like an infection that refused to fade. Karen was still there, still fishing, still claiming. By late afternoon, she had gathered more people, families, kids, even a few lawn chairs lined along the shore. It looked like a full HOA event now. Ethan stood at his window watching them, recording quietly through the glass, zooming in on her movements. She strutted across the grass, speaking loudly about upgrades and maintenance as if she owned the place. One man asked her, "So are we allowed to build a dock over here too?" And Karen proudly replied, "Of course, as long as it follows HOA design standards." That line hit Ethan like thunder. She was talking about building structures on his land. That night, he barely slept, his thoughts looping like a storm. Karen's confidence wasn't just ignorance. It was a performance, a show of dominance, and she wanted everyone to believe she had authority. But Ethan knew something she didn't. Proof always wins over performance. The next morning, she returned again, clipboard in hand, and this time she brought 2 new people, HOA board members, both smug and full of self-importance. They walked along the edge of the lake, measuring with tape, talking loudly about shoreline development potential. Ethan stepped outside, camera in hand, filming again. One of them looked up and said sarcastically, "Oh look, the landowner's making another movie." Ethan didn't respond, just kept the camera steady. Karen looked up, that same grin stretching across her face. "Ethan, since you're here, I'll let you know we're planning to install benches and a shared dock area. It'll be great for the community, and we expect you to cooperate." Ethan stared at her, voice low but sharp. "You'll regret touching a single board here, Karen." She tilted her head, pretending to think, "Is that a threat?" He shook his head. "No, it's a promise." She laughed again, clearly amused by his seriousness. "Oh, Ethan, you take everything so personally. It's just water." But Ethan knew it wasn't just water. It was history, family, and peace, everything that still connected him to the past. That evening, he went to the local sheriff's office and filed a formal complaint for trespassing, attaching videos, photos, and the deed copies. The deputy nodded. "We'll look into it, sir. But HOAs can be tricky. They usually twist things before we even get there." Ethan nodded back. "That's fine. Just let them twist it. I have every inch documented." As he left the office, the sun was setting, and the sky burned orange over the hills, reflecting off the lake like fire. He drove home in silence, the hum of the engine mixing with thoughts of what was coming. He knew Karen wouldn't stop. People like her never did. But now, he wasn't reacting, he was preparing. She thought she had control, but she was standing on ground that legally wasn't hers, and sooner or later, that truth would crush her pride like glass underfoot. Back at the cabin, he sat by the window again, lights off, just watching the moon rise over his lake. The reflection was calm, the surface still, but he knew it wouldn't last. He whispered softly to himself, "Let her dig her own hole, she's almost there." Far across the water, he could see her campfire glow, her laughter carried faintly through the night, still claiming victory she hadn't earned, and Ethan smiled for the first time in days, because deep down, he knew, her confidence was her downfall, and the lake would soon remind her who it really belonged to. The next morning the air around the lake felt heavier, like nature itself could sense the tension building between Ethan and Karen. The sky was grey and low. The wind moved softly across the surface of the water, carrying the echo of yesterday's voices that still lingered like ghosts of arrogance. Ethan sat at his wooden table sipping black coffee, his eyes fixed on the lake that once gave him peace but now only stirred anger. He had filed the complaint, gathered proof, and done everything by the book, yet deep inside he knew it wouldn't stop Karen. People like her didn't quit when faced with reason, they doubled down, and sure enough, just as the sun broke through the clouds, he heard the sound of a car horn, short and sharp, followed by another, then voices, laughter, and the familiar sound of folding chairs opening. She was back again, and this time, she wasn't alone. Ethan walked to the window, his jaw tightening as he saw not just Karen but a small crowd gathered near the lake's edge. There were trucks, cars, even a food stand being set up. It looked like a neighborhood event, a public gathering on private land. The audacity made his blood boil. He grabbed his camera, slipped on his jacket, and started walking toward the noise, every step echoing with determination. He wasn't going to shout or argue this time. He was going to warn her once, clearly, and record everything. The moment he appeared, heads turned. A few of the guests whispered, recognizing him from the previous videos he had taken. But Karen stood front and center, arms crossed, a smile stretching across her face. "Good morning, Ethan," she called, pretending to sound friendly. "I hope you don't mind. We're hosting a small community fishing day. Everyone just wants to relax." Ethan's tone was steady but cold. "You're trespassing again, Karen. And this time it's documented. Every single face here is on private property, and you'll all be getting notices." She let out a laugh, loud and mocking. "Oh, please. You think your little papers mean anything? The board approved this event. It's official HOA business." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He simply raised his camera and began filming, panning slowly across the scene. The tables, the coolers, the sign that said HOA Lake Day, all residents welcome. And finally, her face, frozen in that smirk of control. "Smile," he said softly. "You'll want to remember this." Karen tilted her head, amusement flickering in her eyes. "Is that supposed to scare me, Ethan? Are you going to send your videos to the internet again? You really think people care about your little puddle of water?" Ethan lowered the camera and said calmly, "You keep calling it community property, but the law doesn't bend for your ego. I'm warning you, Karen, this will not end well for you or the HOA." She stepped closer, so close he could see her perfume glisten in the morning light. Her voice lowered to a whisper meant only for him. "You think you're smarter because you have papers, but I have people, I have the board, and I have the votes. Nobody will believe you over me." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "I don't need them to believe me. I just need the truth, and I've already got it." Karen smirked again and turned to her guests, raising her voice so all could hear. "Everyone, don't let this man ruin your fun. This lake belongs to the community, and the community has spoken." Cheers erupted from her crowd, laughter filled the air again, and Ethan felt his patience begin to crack. He turned to leave, but before walking away, he stopped and said in a low, calm voice that cut through the noise like steel, "Enjoy your fun while it lasts, Karen, because soon you'll be explaining all this to someone who doesn't care about your clipboard." She froze for half a second, her smile faltering just slightly, but she recovered quickly. "You're bluffing, Ethan," she said. "You wouldn't dare go against the HOA." Ethan looked her straight in the eyes. "I already did," he said simply, and then he walked away, leaving her standing in front of her crowd pretending she wasn't shaken. Back at his cabin, he uploaded every clip, backed it up on drives, and sent it to his lawyer, then called the county office again, asking for a field officer to inspect the property boundaries. They promised to schedule a visit soon, and he could hear the subtle curiosity in the clerk's voice, as if word about Karen's antics had already started to spread. Over the next few days, the lake turned into a battleground of silence and tension. Karen kept coming back with her people, setting up chairs and fishing, acting like she owned the place, while Ethan watched quietly from his porch, documenting every move, sometimes with his phone, sometimes with his drone camera that hovered silently above the trees. Each day, She grew bolder, her laughter louder, her posts on the HOA's online page more confident. Lake Day success, she wrote one evening, with pictures of smiling residents standing on Ethan's dock, and that post spread fast across the community. But what she didn't know was that Ethan's videos had already reached the county's legal office, and someone there had started asking questions about permits and boundaries. On the fourth day, Ethan decided to make one final personal warning, not for her sake, but for the record. He walked down again, camera on, and said clearly, "Karen, this is the last time I'm going to tell you peacefully. This is private land, and if you continue to trespass, you'll face legal action." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, I'm so scared," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Are you going to have the sheriff arrest the entire neighborhood? Go ahead. I'll be sure to invite the news." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's a good idea. Maybe I'll invite them myself." For the first time, she didn't have a comeback ready. Her eyes flickered briefly with doubt, and Ethan saw it. That small crack in her confidence. It was enough to make him nod once and walk away, the camera still rolling. That night, thunder rolled across the sky, lightning flashed over the water, and the storm that hit the valley felt almost symbolic, heavy rain pelting the surface of the lake as if nature itself was cleansing it. Ethan stood on his porch, drenched but unmoving, watching the storm break branches and shake the trees. A storm that would wash away Karen's arrogance soon enough, because when morning came, so would the county inspector, and then the truth would finally be shown to everyone who had laughed. Ethan whispered softly into the roaring wind, "Let her laugh one more time, because the next sound she'll hear will be silence." Across the lake, lights from Karen's house still glowed faintly through the rain, and somewhere in that storm, she was probably sleeping soundly, still thinking she had won, unaware that the warning had already been given, clear and final, and that the lake she claimed would soon take everything from her that her pride had built. That night the wind calmed and the lake returned to its glass-like stillness, but Ethan knew the peace was only pretending because tomorrow would bring another fight. He could feel it in his bones the way his father once said a storm could be felt before it came. So before the dawn light even touched the trees, he was already awake, sitting at his desk surrounded by papers, maps, and the thick smell of coffee that had long gone cold. The soft hum of his printer filled the small cabin as he made copies of every deed and water rights certificate he owned, each page proof that the lake was his and that no HOA vote could rewrite history. By the time the first rays of sun touched the horizon, he had spread everything across the table like pieces of armor preparing for battle. He walked outside into the early chill, mist crawling across the ground like smoke, and started planting new metal signs around the lake, big bold ones that read "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." He hammered them deep into the soil one by one, the echo of each strike rolling across the quiet water. It felt like drawing a line in stone. When he finished, he pulled a heavy chain from his truck and locked the entrance gate that led from the HOA trail to his side of the lake. The loud click of the padlock was satisfying, the sound of control returning. Then he set up motion cameras on the trees pointing at the shoreline and road, small blinking lights that would record every move and every face that crossed that line. He wasn't angry anymore, he was focused, determined, patient like a hunter who had waited too long. Hours later the silence broke with the familiar growl of an engine climbing the hill, and he knew without looking who it was. Karen's white SUV appeared exactly on cue, sparkling like arrogance on wheels. She stepped out wearing that same sun hat and fake smile. Only this time the smile faltered when her eyes landed on the new signs and the heavy chain blocking the road. Her heels crunched against the gravel as she walked closer, her voice rising. "Ethan, what is this supposed to be? You can't just block community access." Ethan was standing near his truck, hands in his pockets, voice calm like still water. "It's private access, Karen. Always has been. You're not welcome here anymore." She scoffed, waving her clipboard like a sword. "You're overstepping again. The HOA has every right to this space." Ethan took a step forward slowly. "Those signs say otherwise, and the law agrees with me." Her face flushed red, the kind of red that comes from pride bruised in public, and she started pulling at the chain, trying to rattle it free. But it didn't move. She shouted to someone in her car, "Record this. He's illegally blocking an HOA road." Ethan almost smiled. "Go ahead. My cameras are already recording you." That line made her freeze for a moment, then glare. "You think those little cameras make you powerful?" Ethan answered quietly, "No, they make you accountable." Her mouth opened but no words came out. She turned and stormed back to her car, slamming the door, dust rising behind her as she sped off toward the neighborhood. Ethan watched the trail fade behind her tires, knowing this wasn't over. It was only the calm before the storm that would come from her pride. That night, as crickets filled the air and the moon cast long silver reflections across the water, he sat on his porch with his laptop reviewing the footage. Every frame crisp, every voice clear. Proof stacked like a silent army waiting to be unleashed. In the videos, Karen's face twisted in anger, her words shouting over the wind. He saved every clip to multiple drives labeled with the date and time. His lawyer would need them soon. As the night grew colder, he poured himself another cup of coffee and stared at the water, thinking of how this lake had seen everything his family ever fought for. It was more than land, it was memory. And he wasn't going to lose it to a woman with a clipboard. The next morning the inevitable happened. Karen came back, but this time she wasn't alone. 2 HOA board members and a local handyman were with her, carrying tools as if they were about to remove the gate entirely. Ethan stepped outside before they could start. Calm but ready. "Touch that chain and you'll regret it," he said, his tone so even it cut deeper than anger. Karen crossed her arms. "We're here to correct an illegal obstruction," she declared loud enough for her followers to hear. "This road is community property." Ethan didn't argue. He simply pulled a folded paper from his jacket and held it out. "This is the county survey," he said. "You'll see this road ends 50 feet before my gate, which means you're standing on my side right now, technically trespassing again." Her face froze for a second, then hardened. "You're bluffing," she hissed. "That's an old map." Ethan smiled slightly. "Dated 2 years ago, certified by the county office. Same office I called yesterday." She faltered, eyes darting between him and the men beside her. They looked unsure now. One of them murmured, "Maybe we should check first." But Karen snapped, "No, we're not leaving," and stormed back toward her car, where she began making a phone call loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, hello. This is Karen from Ridgeview HOA. I need county enforcement out here immediately. We have a resident blocking community land." Ethan stayed silent, filming everything again, the camera steady in his hands. 10 minutes later she hung up and shouted, "They're coming, you'll be sorry." He didn't flinch. "Good, maybe they'll bring a measuring tape." For the next hour they stood there in awkward silence, broken only by birds and the wind, until finally a county truck appeared at the curve. 2 officials stepped out, one holding a map tablet. They approached politely. "Morning, sir, what seems to be the issue?" Karen wasted no time, pointing toward the gate, his blocking access to a community lake. The officer turned to Ethan. "Sir?" Ethan handed over the folder calmly. "All ownership documents are here, including the deed and boundary survey." The officer took his time reading, then looked up. "This shows it's private property, not community." Karen blinked rapidly. "That can't be right," she stammered. "We voted." The officer interrupted gently. "Votes don't change county lines." The silence that followed was almost musical. Karen's mouth opened, then closed again, her face pale with disbelief. The officers nodded to Ethan and left after confirming the paperwork, their truck disappearing down the road, leaving Karen standing frozen. The crowd that came with her started to drift away quietly. She looked smaller now, fragile behind her sunglasses. Finally she spat out, "This isn't over," before speeding off, tires throwing dirt behind her. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his body, but inside he knew she wasn't done. Pride like hers didn't surrender easily. It regrouped, plotted, and struck again. So he tightened the lock once more and whispered to the still air, "No, Karen, it's not over, but next time it'll be on record." For 2 days the lake stayed quiet. The air felt cleaner, and Ethan thought maybe at last Karen had realized her mistake. But deep down he knew silence from her never meant peace. It meant planning, plotting, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. And he was right, because on the 3rd morning his phone buzzed with a notification that made his blood boil. A post on the Ridgeview HOA community page titled "Update on the Lake Dispute." Written by none other than Karen herself. It said, "We are addressing a case of illegal obstruction by a non-compliant resident who is attempting to privatize community property. Legal action pending." The comments were filled with support from her followers, calling Ethan greedy, selfish, even a troublemaker. He stared at the screen in disbelief, shaking his head. She was twisting the truth again, and now half the town would believe her. He put the phone down and whispered, "So that's how you want to play it?" His tone low and calm, the calm of someone who had reached a breaking point but was too smart to explode. he spent the rest of the day preparing, making copies of the inspection report. The county officers had signed, the video footage, and the photos showing Karen tearing down signs and trespassing. He was done warning her. Now he wanted witnesses. By the end of the week, an HOA meeting was announced, a special session at the Ridgeview Clubhouse to discuss community disputes. Ethan knew that meant him, so he ironed his shirt, packed his documents, and walked into that meeting hall like a soldier entering enemy territory. The room was full of neighbors, curious faces, whispering voices, and at the center of it all sat Karen, confident as ever, tapping her pen against the table with a smile that said she thought she had already won. She stood up as soon as Ethan walked in, her voice loud, "Everyone, this is the man who's been trying to block our lake access." Murmurs filled the room, eyes turned to him, some sympathetic, others judging. Ethan didn't react. He walked straight to the table, placed his thick folder down, and said in a calm, firm tone, "This is proof that the lake you're calling community property has belonged to my family since 1932. Every map, every survey, every permit confirms it." Karen laughed, a short, sharp sound meant to humiliate him. "Old papers don't mean much when the HOA has jurisdiction now," she said confidently, but Ethan didn't blink. He opened the folder and laid out copies for everyone to see, including the county inspection signed just 2 days ago. "Read this," he said, his voice cutting through the chatter. "The county verified the boundaries. This lake is private, and your actions have been recorded and reported." For a moment, the room went still. Karen's face twitched, but she forced a smile. "You can't scare us with paperwork," she said. "The HOA will appeal." Ethan looked at her and replied quietly, "Appeal all you want, Karen. But the next time you or anyone from this board steps foot on my land, it won't be a complaint, it'll be a lawsuit." Her chair screeched against the floor as she stood, red-faced now. "You're threatening the community," she shouted. "You think you can stand against us?" Ethan didn't raise his voice. "I'm standing for my rights, Karen. That's not a threat, it's a fact." His calmness made her even angrier. She snatched the papers off the table, trying to make a show of tearing them. But one of the other board members stopped her, whispering something that made her pause. The room fell into uneasy silence again. Then the vice president cleared his throat and said, "We'll review the documents," clearly trying to calm things down. But the damage was done. Everyone had seen the proof, and more importantly, they had seen Karen lose control. Ethan picked up his folder, nodded once, and walked out. The whispers followed him like wind through leaves. By the time he reached his truck outside, he could already hear Karen yelling behind closed doors, her voice echoing through the hall, high and furious. He can't just walk away like that. But he did. He drove home in silence, the engine's hum blending with the steady beat of his heart, every mile closer to the lake, feeling like a victory. That night he sat by the dock again, the moon reflecting on the calm water, and for the first time in weeks, he smiled. But deep inside he knew Karen wasn't finished. Not yet. Her pride wouldn't let her walk away quietly. She would try something else, something desperate, and he had to be ready, and he was, because early next morning, he woke up to the sound of voices again, this time not laughter but argument. He rushed outside and saw 3 people standing near the lake's edge. Karen, a man in a suit, and another woman holding papers. They were talking fast, pointing toward his dock. Ethan walked closer, his camera already recording. "Back again?" he asked, his tone calm but sharp. Karen turned, her fake smile already in place. "Oh, Ethan, perfect timing. This is our legal advisor. He's here to inform you that the HOA is moving forward with a claim for shared usage rights." Ethan chuckled. "Shared usage? You're really scraping the bottom now, aren't you?" The man in the suit cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, I'm just here to notify you of their intent." Ethan nodded. "Then note this. Your intent is denied," he said, turning away. But Karen raised her voice. "We'll see what the court says." Ethan stopped walking, looked over his shoulder, and replied quietly, "We will, and I'll bring every recording with me." Then he walked back to his cabin, leaving them standing there under the hot sun, their confidence melting slowly like wax. Later that evening, a letter appeared in his mailbox, HOA cease and desist notice, demanding that he remove his obstructions and allow community members to resume use of the shared lake area. Ethan laughed out loud reading it, the paper shaking in his hand. "Shared lake area," he repeated. "You really don't learn, do you, Karen?" He folded the letter, slid it into a drawer marked evidence. and poured himself a drink, watching the sunset paint the water red and gold. In the distance he could see movement. Karen again, pacing near the road, on the phone, talking fast and gesturing angrily. She was unraveling, and he could feel it. She had built her power on fear and noise, but now both were slipping away. Every move she made only dug her deeper into trouble, and Ethan knew the final confrontation was close. Maybe days away, maybe tomorrow, but it would come, and when it did, the whole community would see who really owned the lake and who had been living on lies all along. The morning of the showdown began with a silence so heavy it felt like the whole valley was holding its breath. The sky was bright but cold, the air thick with that stillness that comes before something big. Ethan woke early not because he wanted to but because he couldn't sleep. His mind had been turning all night, replaying every word, every insult, every threat Karen had thrown. Today was the day the county inspector and sheriff were coming. Today the truth would finally meet her pride face to face. He looked out over the lake as fog drifted off its surface, calm and quiet as if mocking the storm that was about to break. By the time the clock hit 10 he heard the familiar sound of engines on the gravel road. Not one, not two, but several vehicles. He stepped out onto his porch, camera in hand, and saw them. 2 county trucks, 1 sheriff cruiser, and behind them, as expected, Karen's white SUV leading a small convoy of cars filled with her loyal HOA followers. They parked along the fence line like soldiers lining up for war. Karen stepped out first, dressed in a bright red jacket like she was showing off, her sunglasses reflecting the morning sun, clipboard clutched tightly in one hand. She called out loudly, "Ethan, I hope you're ready to face the truth today." Ethan walked slowly toward the gate, calm, controlled, his camera recording every step. "I've been ready for weeks, Karen," he said, his voice steady. "Are you?" She smirked. "Of course, this will be quick." Then she turned to the county officials, her tone switching to charm. "Officers, thank you for coming. As you can see, this resident has illegally fenced off our community lake and we're here to settle this once and for all." The inspector nodded politely, opening his map tablet. "We're just here to verify boundaries. We'll check both records." Ethan handed over his folder before she could speak again. "Everything's already been submitted to your office," he said. The inspector nodded again. "Yes, we have it, but we'll confirm on site." The sheriff stood nearby, arms crossed, silent but watchful, his badge glinting under the sun. Karen leaned toward him, trying to win sympathy. "You can see what we've been dealing with, officer. He's been harassing residents, blocking access, making threats." But the sheriff cut her off with a calm voice. "We'll let the county handle the property issue before jumping to conclusions." Her mouth twitched, the interruption bruising her pride. The inspector motioned for them all to follow as he walked toward the lake with his assistant measuring device in hand. The crowd trailed behind him, whispering and filming. Ethan stayed quiet, walking just a few steps behind, the soft crunch of gravel under their feet the only sound. They stopped at the chained gate first. The inspector looked at his screen, then up at the landmarkers, adjusting his device, typing something, then said slowly, "The coordinates line up exactly with the boundary line. The chain and signs are within private property limits." Karen's face stiffened. "That's impossible. Check again," she demanded. The inspector looked at her, politely but firm. "We will check everything." Then he kept walking. They reached the water's edge. He looked down at the reflection of his map and then at the horizon where the trees met the lake. "The entire shoreline falls within the same private parcel, including the dock," he said finally, loud enough for everyone to hear. A murmur ran through the crowd. Ethan didn't smile. He didn't need to. Karen, on the other hand, was shaking her head. No, you're reading it wrong. It has to be wrong," she shouted, her voice cracking slightly. The inspector turned the screen toward her. "This is the county map overlay, directly connected to our official system. It can't be wrong." The sheriff cleared his throat and stepped forward. "So to confirm, this property belongs solely to Mr. Ethan Clark." The inspector nodded. "Yes, sir, entirely." The sheriff looked at Karen, his tone polite but edged. "I'm afraid you and your group have been trespassing." The words hit like thunder. For a long moment no one spoke. Karen's followers shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their phones. One man muttered, "Oh man." Under his breath, Karen's face turned red then pale, her hands trembling as she tried to hold onto her clipboard like it could anchor her pride. "This can't be happening," she whispered, then louder, "This isn't over, we'll appeal." Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut through her noise. "Appeal all you want, Karen. But the truth's already printed on every map in this county. You can't vote away ownership. She turned toward him, eyes burning. You think you've won? She hissed. He tilted his head slightly. No, I think I've proven what you should have known all along. You can't bully your way into someone's life and call it community spirit. Her lips parted but no words came. She turned away, muttering curses under her breath. The sheriff stepped closer. I suggest you and your group leave the property immediately before I have to file an official trespassing report. Her shoulders stiffened but she nodded once sharply, snapping, everyone, pack up, let's go. Her voice cold and broken, her army of followers quietly retreated to their cars. The same people who had cheered her on now avoided her eyes. Ethan stood still, watching them leave one by one, the sound of engines fading into the distance, dust settling slowly over the road like a curtain closing on a failed show. The inspector handed back the folder. All verified, sir. We'll send a formal statement to both parties. Ethan nodded, thank you for coming. And as they left he turned toward the lake again. Its surface calm and glowing under the noon sun. He could finally breathe. The battle that had stolen his peace for weeks was over, at least the loud part of it. But as he looked across the water he saw something small glinting on the far bank. Karen's clipboard, forgotten in her rush to flee, lying face down in the mud, the papers inside soaked and ruined, a symbol of her defeat. He walked back to his cabin slowly, the cool wind brushing past his face, each step lighter than the last. For the first time in weeks he heard the lake again. The soft lap of water against the dock, the chirp of crickets, the whisper of trees. All the sounds that had been buried under shouting and arrogance had finally returned. He sat down on his porch and watched the reflection of clouds drift across the lake's surface, feeling the quiet peace that only comes when justice finally lands where it belongs. The war was over, the truth had spoken, and the lake had chosen its rightful owner. Days turned into weeks after the showdown, and the lake that had once been a battlefield of pride and shouting slowly began to breathe again. The mornings were peaceful. The fog rolled across the water like a soft blanket, and for the first time in months Ethan could stand on his dock without hearing voices echoing across the surface. No laughter, no music, no trespassers. Only the sound of nature. Reclaiming its rhythm, the birds returned, the fish broke the surface again, and the air smelled clean, calm, untouched, just the way it used to before Karen and her crowd had tried to take what wasn't theirs. Ethan spent his days quietly, fixing his boat, trimming the reeds, walking the edge of his property with his camera still mounted high on the trees, though now it recorded nothing but wind and sunlight. Yet he left them on because they were reminders of a fight he had won, not with anger, but with patience, proof that silence can roar louder than shouting when truth stands behind it. But peace didn't mean Karen was gone. Her defeat had become the talk of Ridgeview. Everyone knew the story. The HOA president who tried to claim a private lake and ended up exposed by the county sheriff himself. Her arrogance had turned her into gossip, and her followers who once cheered her now whispered behind her back. Within 2 weeks she resigned from her position, citing stress and unfair treatment. Though everyone knew the real reason, the board quietly removed her posts and deleted her angry rants from the community page, pretending it had never happened. But everyone remembered. The story had spread beyond the neighborhood, reaching nearby towns where people nodded and said, "That's the one who tried to take the lake." Ethan didn't celebrate, he didn't brag, he simply continued living his quiet life. Sometimes he'd see her SUV drive by the road above, slower than usual, the windows rolled up tight, and he'd catch a glimpse of her face, pale and tired, the face of someone who had lost the war she started. He felt no joy in her downfall, only relief that the storm was finally over. One evening as the sun dipped low and turned the water gold, he sat on the edge of the dock, fishing line in hand, a soft wind brushing his hair, and thought about how easily peace can be broken by pride, how quickly calm can turn into chaos when someone believes control is ownership. His phone buzzed beside him, a notification from the HOA community site, a new post from the new president. "We apologize to Mr. Clark for the misunderstanding regarding property boundaries. The HOA respects his rights and looks forward to maintaining positive relations." He smiled faintly, not because of the apology, but because the word respect finally appeared in a place it never had before. He took a slow sip of his coffee, watching the ripples fade where his fishing line met the water, and whispered, "About time." The next morning, he found an envelope at his gate, no stamp, no name, just a folded note that read, "I went too far. I'm sorry." The handwriting was sharp but shaky, Karen's for sure. He stood there for a moment, staring at it, the wind tugging at the paper, and then he placed it inside his drawer, right next to all the evidence he had gathered, not out of anger but because it belonged to that chapter of his life, the one that was finally closed. From that day forward, no one from Ridgeview crossed the fence again, no fishing lines, no coolers, no laughter that didn't belong. The lake became quiet again, almost sacred. And sometimes at night, when the moonlight touched the still water, Ethan would sit outside listening to the frogs and crickets, smiling softly because he knew the truth had found its way home. Justice hadn't come with shouting or revenge. It had come with patience and proof, two things Karen never had, and the lake had kept its promise to his family. It had remained theirs, untouched, defended by law, and protected by silence. The kind of silence that spoke louder than any HOA meeting. Sometimes he'd hear the distant hum of cars from the Ridgeview neighborhood, faint and harmless, and it reminded him how close the world's noise always is, how easily it can creep into peace if you don't stand your ground. But Ethan had stood, and now the lake stood with him, shining under the sun, quiet and timeless, like it always should be, and in that still reflection he saw not victory or revenge, but the truth his father once told him, whispered in memory as he watched the water. Never let anyone take what's yours, son, not because you own it, but because you respect it. And with that thought, Ethan smiled, reeled in his line, and walked back to his cabin under the fading light. The sound of the lake soft behind him, the sound of peace finally won.